Hello and welcome to this edition of The Boomer Beat. I am your host, Beverly Mahone, and today it gives me great pleasure to welcome those of you who know him as the Beeve from Leave It to Beaver. It is the one and only Jerry Mathers. Hey, Jerry, how are you?
Couldn't be better. Thank you for the great introduction.
Absolutely. How you doing today, by the way?
Everything's going good for me. What about you?
Doing pretty good. It's a nice sunny day here today, even though it is in November. But, being in the South, you don't really get a lot of cold days. So I'm
But
enjoying it.
In California, we get a lot of hot ones. So this one is just about right. It's not really, really hot yet.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. So we all want to know, what have you been doing since Leave It to Beaver's been over?
Well, we did the new Leave It to Beaver, and that went on for almost 6 years. And I have diabetes. So I go around and do a lot of speaking at different diabetes conferences and things. I've controlled mine through diet and exercise, but only because I caught it early. And what I mean by caught was I was very, very overweight. I thought I was leading the good life, and the good life was not really the good life. So I get around and I meet a lot of people. I go to autograph shows, and I'm pretty much retired. I've been working since I was 2, so I figure I get a little leeway.
Now, that was going to be my next question. That was a very nice segue. So, how did you get started in the acting business? You said you were 2 years old, but I mean, I'm certainly that wasn't your decision. What was it about your parents that thought, well, maybe he should be an actor?
Well, it wasn't anything about my parents. My mom had taken me to a department store, and I was just under 2 years old. And she was trying on outfits for me so she would have something that I could wear for my birthday. And a lady came up to her and said, "Is this your little boy?" And my mom went, "Oh, he didn't. Whatever he touched, I'll pay for. What did he wreck something?" And the lady said, "No, but I noticed you've tried on a lot of our outfits, and he fits them all perfectly." And the little boy that did the 2-year-old has now moved into, I think it was the 4-year-old sizes, and we need a new model. Could your son be a model? And my mom my mom was from Minnesota. My dad was from Iowa. They'd lived in Los Angeles for quite a while, but they still knew that there were a lot of things that went on in Los Angeles that didn't go on in either of the other states. So they said, "Well, I don't know. What would he have to do?" And the lady said, "Well, he would have to come on usually a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon and put on our clothes and step out with the model. And we would give him one outfit, and we'd also pay him a little bit." My mom said he could do that.
Of course you can. Of course you can. Wow. So you started as a model.
And it wasn't anything. I know a lot of people say, "Well, you must have had a real pushy family or something like that." No, it was just that happened. It's just a happenstance. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
And how long did you do that?
Well, I did that for about probably, I'll say 6 months, but I say I did it for quite a bit after that. But the reason I say 6 months, at that time, people don't realize that that was 1950, and television was really just starting and everything was live. Now, it pretty much started in New York. And they could go to the New York stage and get child actors, but in Los Angeles, there weren't a whole lot of actors that were that young. And so when they looked around, they said, "Well, the models go out and they walk around, and they're not frightened by crowds." So I started working in live TV. I did the Red Skelton show and all these different shows. A lot of them aren't even on anymore. But whenever they needed a little boy, since it was live, if you walked out in front of a live audience with the lights and the cameras going everywhere and either forgot your lines or ran away, they were in big trouble. So once you did it right one time, you worked all the time. And that's what happened. There was about probably 4 or 5 boys and about 4 or 5 girls, and it depended. If the mother and father had blonde hair, then I didn't work. If they had brown hair, I worked.
Okay. So how long did this go on? I mean, so you moved from modeling and then you kind of just did this little television, but did you really have a concept of what was happening?
No, but I realized very soon that I was doing a lot of things very different because they were looking for kids then to do movies and television. A lot of television was live. So I suddenly started working all the time. And then in 1957, I got Leave It to Beaver. And my mom took me on an interview. There were about 3,000 people in the interview, not just in Los Angeles, but in Chicago and New York. And we couldn't figure out. I mean, there were some people my age, but there were all these other ages. Well, they were looking for Wally and the Beaver and Eddie Haskell and Lumpy. So there were a whole lot of different people. And my mom said, "Why are we on this interview?" And I kept getting called back. And she'd go, "We've been there 6, 8 times now. Can't they make up their mind?" What we didn't know was that I'd already pretty much been chosen. It was down to 3 or 4 people, but I think they knew that I was probably going to get the job, but they were looking for an older brother. They were looking for all the other Lumpy and Eddie and, all the Beavers friends, Gilbert and Whitey. So we kept going back thinking, why don't they just tell you you're either going to get the job or you're not? Because when you went back for some of the other ones, the kids looked nothing like me. I'm thinking, why am I here? These are, Wally's age. Well, they wanted to see how the different actors would interact with us.
Okay. And how old were you when you started Leave It to Beaver?
I was just 7. It started in 1957, and we used to do 39 shows a year, and we'd take a small break, and then we'd go back to New York and Chicago to do PR, take a few more weeks off, and we'd start another 39 weeks of working basically either 8 to 5 or 9 to 6. Now, I didn't work all the time, so if it was a show that more was on Wally or Tony Dow, I didn't work that much, but I also had to go to school. So I had a private tutor, and Tony had one because he was in high school, and we went 3 hours a day. But it was a really good education because you got some of the best teachers in the LA Unified School District. And, so I'm a graduate of Berkeley. It was really something that was fun and something that I loved doing.
Wow. All right. Well, we're going to jump into some questions from various fans who wanted to ask you a question from Facebook. The first question comes from Michelle, who is from Ohio, and she wants to know, did you really get along with the actors who played your parents? Did they feel like your second family, or were you realize, well, they're just actors just like me? And
what a lot of people don't realize is that I had worked an awful lot before Leave It to Beaver. So I did movies, I did a lot of television shows. So I was used to going away from home and not maybe going to kindergarten, but going to a studio and pretending. And that's what it was. It was pretending. And I knew that. And I knew that when you went home, I went home to my real family. I was treated very well. And it was just a lot of fun for me.
well, let me ask you, how different were your own parents from the parents we saw on Leave It to Beaver? Because, I was just always wondering why June had pearls and a dress and an apron on when she cooked every day. And I was like, and back then I didn't think about it, but as I got older, I'm like, well, who does that? My mother never did that. So.
I don't understand why not, but actually the real reason is that Barbara Billingsley was, to be honest with you, a New York model, and she was a very, very skinny New York model. And when she would be wearing clothes, the lines in her neck right here made it look like she had a scar because she was so skinny. So they put the pearls to cut through that kind of dark spot where I guess it's right below your Adam's apple is. So that's why. It wasn't for any reason that she wanted to be swank or something like that. It was just to cover this little shadow because people would say, oh, did she have, some kind of an operation or something like that?
Wow, I did not know. That's a secret. See, now we all know.
Now you know all the secrets almost.
So did your real parents interact with your TV parents at all? I mean, in a social kind of way, or no?
Oh, very definitely. Everybody was very, very close. Hugh Beaumont was interesting as an actor because he really was a Methodist minister. And he started being an actor just so he could preach on the weekends and have a job that he could take off if whatever. So Barbara was a very a New York model. Tony Dow was an AAU swimming and diving champion and was possibly going to the Olympics. So they were a very diverse crowd of people. And I'd been working as an actor since I was 2 years old. So I'd done movies with Alfred Hitchcock, Bob Hope, all sorts of different. I'd been working on live TV at 2 years old. So, we were all a very accomplished group of actors.
Wow. All right. So this question comes from Amanda from Tennessee. She wants to know, do you ever wish you had a normal childhood? Now, I don't know what normal is, but and is there anything you feel you missed out on as a child?
Not really. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is I wasn't on Leave It to Beaver for my entire childhood. I was really only on for 6 years. So I went to school with a private tutor, which is probably some of the best education. It's like the education of the kings and queens of Europe. And I really wanted to play sports, and my parents knew that. And series are only allowed under the union rules of SAG-AFTRA to put you under contract for 6 years. So we did 6 years of Leave It to Beaver, and the writers and producers and everybody said, we have 234 episodes. That's enough to almost show one a day. And we just said, everybody's happy. If we do it another 6 years, everybody will be very tired. Let's just kind of walk away with a good product instead of trying to push it.
Okay. This question comes from Sonia from North Carolina. She wants to know, did you ever want to, or did you ever get to direct an episode?
Not on the original show, because when I left it, I was about 14. On the new Leave It to Beaver that we did in the 80s, and we did quite a few episodes of that along with Tuner Television and Universal. I directed about 7 or 8 episodes, and Tony Dow also did some directing. So I am a member of in good standing of the Directors Guild. But it's really hard to work as an actor when you're on the screen, because you're not only watching yourself, but you have to really watch everybody else when you're the director. So I did it. It was fun. But I like being an actor better than a director. It's a lot of responsibility.
So let's talk a little bit about, from moving from the original Leave It to Beaver in the 50s or going into the 60s. I believe it ended in 63. Is that correct?
Well, I was off of it in late 62, and in 63, they were still having episodes. So it actually ran new episodes into 63.
Okay. And then moving 20 years later into the 80s, I mean, it's a whole new Leave It to Beaver. What was that like?
Well, it was interesting. The thing about Leave It to Beaver, and there's very few other series that have done this, it played in about 50 or 60 languages all over the world, and it was never off the air in the United States. So even though I only did it for 6 years, it went into reruns. It didn't play at night like it did when the original was on. It played in the mornings usually, or in the afternoons, and it had a huge audience. So it wasn't like I had just done it and it just disappeared like a lot of the shows I did. And I'm not saying that was a bad thing, but I did a lot of things I didn't do as a series. But Leave It to Beaver was just always on. And I could walk down the street, even when I was like 21, 22 years old, and people go, "You're the Beaver." But, they were looking at me, and I was 8 years old when they were watching me on TV.
And, that is so interesting because Leave It to Beaver came on the year I was born. So I was like, okay, but I remember seeing it for years and years, and you were still that little boy, but it ran in syndication it seemed like forever.
Well, it's still on. It's still running. So it is forever. And that's the really interesting part, because every once in a while I get people that say, "How come your parents drove such old cars?" It wasn't old cars. That's when it was made. They were brand new that year. So, it's just something that has a lot of staying power, because it really isn't topical. It's about 2 boys, Wally and the Beaver, and their friends, and like Eddie Haskell, I don't know if I'd want to call him a friend or not, but them growing up in the United States. And I mean, things have changed a lot, but kids growing up are always pretty much the same.
That is true. Okay, this question comes from Kathy out of Arizona. She wants to know, how were you and the other child actors treated on the set? And what guidelines did they have in the late 50s and early 60s for child actors compared to today?
They're pretty much the same, and they have been since at least as long as I've been working, which was 1950s when I started as an actor. One of the things you have that an older actor doesn't is you have a welfare worker. She's also the teacher. So they were people that had teaching credentials for your grade. So I went to school, basically the entire elementary school, on a set with a private tutor. Now you say, well, that's like the education of the kings and queens of Europe. My dad ended up as a superintendent of LA City schools, but he could pick the best teachers from the entire system. It paid a lot more than a regular teacher. And Tony Dow would have a high school teacher. I would have an elementary school teacher. I did go to school with other kids if they were on the show, but a lot of times I was one-on-one with an absolutely fabulous teacher. And by the time I went to high school, which was when Leave It to Beaver ended, I was really quite a bit above my grade level as far as math and a few of the other things that I had studied.
All right, this question comes from Kathy, also from Arizona. I think it's the same person.
Okay.
Is there an episode that turned out differently than it was supposed to? You know, you go in and you did scripted one way, and then all of a sudden something happens on the set and it turns out differently, and the director say, "Oh yeah, that's great. Now let's just leave that." Is there any episode that you can recall like that?
It depends what you call that. I know that sounds kind of funny, but a lot of times, of course, I couldn't read, and so my mom would read me the script the night before, and I would memorize it. So a lot of times I would come in, and not very often, but it did happen, where I would say something that was exactly the same meaning, but I said it in I guess you could call it my own language. So I might have a little different way of saying it, and they liked that better. They said it sounded more like a real kid. So a lot of times things that were shown were not exactly as they were written, because they had secretaries that everything was exactly right, but it really wasn't the way that people talked.
Okay. This question comes from Ruth out of Dallas, Texas. She wants to know, what was your favorite episode and why?
That would be almost, in fact, it would be, I won't even say almost impossible. That's like saying, what was your favorite week at school? Because every week there were different people. We had guest stars, crew members. We had a crew of about 70 people, mostly men, because they were all jobs like, grips and people that would do stuff. But we had some women on the show who were backstage. And so it was like a big family. And most of those people, they were very, I can't, not careful, but they wanted family people. So they all had families so they could kind of know how kids acted. So between scenes, we'd go out and throw footballs and baseballs. And, you can't make a child work. So if they're not happy at the studio, you have a problem. So it was just a really fun time. I had a private tutor. And, it's like the education of the kings and queens of Europe. I'm a graduate of Berkeley. So it was just a great education and a fun time.
All right. Now, this question comes from Victoria out of Ohio. She wants to know, if you, in hindsight now, which is always 2020, would you have rather had the show set up where you'd be playing video games with your friends all the time, or would you like to be, as you did, outside playing catch and other outside activities?
I'd rather be outside doing outside activities. And that's the way I really grew up. It wasn't that, those other things weren't available to me. My dad retired as a superintendent, but he was also of LA City schools. But when I was doing Leave It to Beaver, he was a vice principal, principal. Before that, he'd been a coach. So sports were always very important to me. I couldn't obviously be on a football or a baseball team, but in between scenes, we'd go outside, and Tony and myself and crew members would throw footballs and baseballs. And so, because they wanted us both to have a little exercise. When you're an actor, when things are being shot, you have to be very quiet. You just sit there. and they wanted us to be real kids. So we'd go out and just have a great time running around Universal Studios, and it was just a really fun life.
As far as your own family, did you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister and three brothers. One of my brothers is a director of photography. My other two brothers are sheriffs, and my sister's a mayor. So
Oh,
we have all sorts of different things in our family, but everybody's, turned out very well. And my dad was as I say, superintendent. My mom took me to the studio, but she was also having all those other kids because I'm the oldest. So a lot of times I'd go with other people, but it was fun. I'd go there. I could only work from either 8 to 5 or 9 to 6. So it wasn't like I was there. And they made it, they planned it, especially, we didn't shoot like a lot of the other shows, so that we would, when our school year was over, that's when we'd go on hiatus for the 3 months. I had a private tutor, and just everything worked out very well for me.
great. All right, Judy out of North Carolina wants to know, did the castmates stay in touch? Do you have any type of reunions that you participated in with them?
We did, we didn't do a whole lot because Barbara and Hugh did not do a whole lot of different fan shows and things like that. And honestly, I really didn't either until I got out of college. Tony did some, but we were all good friends. But it's like anything else. It's like when you're going to elementary school. How often did you go back and see your elementary third grade teacher? Well, you saw him whenever you could, and we would do like TV shows and things like that where we were guests, but it wasn't like I was at their house every day or every other day.
Did Barbara and Hugh have children of their own?
It very definitely did. Um, Probably Hugh. Barbara was a New York model, so she was very, very, she was always dressed to the nines. Hugh Beaumont was a Methodist minister and had only gotten into TV, so he was in a very poor section, and he needed money for his congregation, and that's how he became an actor.
Okay, so um, this question comes from Melody out of North Carolina. She wants to know, did you ever watch any other family-oriented shows like One Day at a Time or Good Times or The Cosby Show, Donna Reed? Well, Donna Reed was really back in your day, and The Brady Bunch. And how would you compare those shows to the shows that you were a part of back in the 50s and the 60s?
That's just a really hard question because they were all very different with different actors. Leave It to Beaver was about two brothers, growing up in America, and all those other shows had focuses either on a certain character or a lot of characters. I think each one was something that people could watch and relate to. I know I get a lot of little girls or women now that say, I was doing those same things with my older sister, or they're the Beaver and there's a younger sister. But it was just about a family growing up in America and the things actually that were really happening to kids when they were growing up in America.
All right. Okay, so I don't know if this is going to reveal any secrets, but
We love to reveal secrets.
who was your favorite on the show?
That's like saying, who was your favorite person in your third or fourth grade class? Everybody was, except we were really lucky. We had a crew of, I think it was like 85 or 90 people that, were there all the time. And most of them, they were very not strict, but they had mostly family people on the show. Like the script girl had a couple of kids, and all the lighting people. So they were used to dealing with kids. And between scenes, Tony Dow and I, when we were not in school, because we had private tutors, we went for a few hours a day and got up to a certain amount of education. And then we'd go out and play baseball with these guys and do all sorts of things.
Okay, now as far as who was your least favorite, is there one that you didn't
On the
really
show?
quite get along with? Nah, you could have.
I'll tell you the truth. I think the reason for that was the writers between them had, I think it was 13 or 14 kids, and they knew how to pick boys and girls for the show that they thought would get along with everybody else. So, it was always a treat, because when there was a show where either my friends or Tony Dow's, Wally's friends weren't on the show, we had a private tutor and we went to school by ourselves, and there really wasn't anybody else on the set that was our age. When we had big schoolroom scenes or stuff, it was like, oh great, I have all my friends, and they were all my friends. We had we used to run around, and the makeup room at Universal had all sorts of masks in it, from Frankenstein to Wolfman. And because Leave It to Beaver had a lot of things that happened on the show, where we had a special makeup man. His name was Bob Don. He worked up in the lab up there, but he'd also like to work on Leave It to Beaver when he wasn't working on special things. So he was always there, and it was just a fun time. I built boats. I built all sorts of models. Probably one of the few kids that grew up building models with grips and lighting people that were, the top of the line in their business. And here they are helping me build a little model car or whatever.
All right. Of the main cast members, who's no longer with us?
Well, Hugh Beaumont is no longer with us. Barbara Billingsley and Ken Osmond, who played Eddie Haskell. Barbara played June and Ward, and Lumpy also. I can't forget that. But they were very good friends. It was very, very sad that we lost them, and I'm just happy that I can still turn on the show a lot of times on pay TV or regular TV, or I've got the DVD set and see them and go back and think about wonderful times I had in my life doing Leave It to Beaver.
Now, this year, didn't you celebrate like the 63rd anniversary? It was
every year it gets more. What can I tell you? But it's never been off the air. It shows all over the world. In fact, I speak Japanese. Now, the funny part is, you hear my voice. When I speak in Japanese, I have this really high voice. It sounds just like a little girl. But I speak all these different languages that I don't even know. And but in a lot of ways, the show was made in 1957, and it was the first time that people in a lot of foreign countries ever saw how people lived in America, because the things they were seeing, we were all gangsters and robbing people and doing all sorts of things, because that's what the movie showed. So when they saw how a child was growing up in the United States, it gave them maybe a different perception of what was really going on in America.
How much of your real personality was Beaver's personality, or were you really two different kind of kids?
That's a very hard question. We're very much alike and very different. I wasn't the Beaver in my family. I was the Wally. I was the oldest. I have a sister and three brothers. My dad was a vice principal and then a principal and then superintendent of LA City Schools. So he was used to dealing with kids. I had a sister and three brothers, but I was the oldest. It's kind of funny because Tony Dow, who played my older brother, he was the youngest. He had an older brother. So he was really the Beaver in his family, and I was Wally in mine.
That's interesting. All right. So this question comes from Martin out of North Carolina. He wants to know, why do you think so many love your character as the Beaver?
I think it's because, and this is not just boys, I think it's boys and girls can relate to the character. Everybody did things not exactly like the Beaver, but when they were growing up, things like that happened. Everybody had friends like Lumpy, or your older brother or sister had a friend like Eddie Haskell. So I think the characters are believable, and they're people that you may have hopefully had better ones, but some of them worse maybe. But everybody knows it, and it really, all the shows came from real life. All those things really happened. It just wasn't what in Hollywood they call a joke show, where it's set up, joke. Everything comes from things really happening and things that really did happen to kids in that time frame.
And the fact that, you are still so loved as the Beaver around the world, you have all of this merchandise that people are just so, enamored with, and they, want to get it. So tell our audience where they can go for getting some memorabilia from those days.
Well, I have all sorts of things. I have hats because I'm very famous for my green hat on Leave It to Beaver.
Yes.
I have T-shirts with my pictures, baseballs, personalized photos. And where you can get all that stuff is at Jerry Mathers Beaver merch period.com.
Okay, so we will make sure that we put that up on the screen so that people will be able to see it and get one of those collectible items. Now, it says that in 2016, you gave this inspiring commencement speech for the Indiana Tech graduating class, and you were given an honorary degree, a doctorate of humane letters. So, what was so inspiring about that speech?
I don't really know because I just gave the same speech that I always give. It tells about my life, the things I've done. I'm actually a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley. I hold a degree in philosophy, but I have tried to live my life because I know that for a lot of people, they see me on TV, and a lot of people that have been on TV, especially a lot of the child stars, had problems. I got very, very lucky. My parents were the reason for that. Not that my mom, who took me to the studio every day, wasn't giving me a lot of things, but my dad had a real good way of looking at kids because when I was doing Leave It to Beaver, he was a vice principal and then principal of, and he retired as a superintendent of LA City Schools. So he was dealing with the best and the worst of kids, and he knew what kids should be doing, that they always got in a little bit of trouble, but he kept me from getting in a lot of trouble.
What advice would you give today to parents who are thinking about or wanting to get their children into acting? What would you say to the parents?
The parents, I'd say make sure that your child wants to do it, that this just wasn't something that you wanted to do all your life and you're pushing it on your parents. Mine was just all by accident. My mom just happened to be at the right place at the right time where people saw me, said, "Could your boy do this?" I started off as a model because I fit the clothes in a department store that she was doing. So it was just all by accident. And if you really want it too much, sometimes, especially for a parent, and your kid doesn't, it's not really that great for them.
What advice would you give to a child who is thinking about wanting to be an actor?
Well, that's very simple. You have many, many chances. You have school plays, you have acting classes, usually starting in probably high school and definitely in college, but you have to get all of the practice in you can. I got lucky because I started at 2 years old.
Right.
And so, I was a trained actor by the time I was 4 and 5. I was doing live television. That was before Leave It to Beaver.
All right. Well, that's gonna do it. Thank you
Oh,
so
you
much.
didn't stump me even once.
I didn't even stump you even once because, like I said, the questions really did come from your fans who wanted to know more about your life. You are married, you have a lovely wife, right?
I certainly do. Teresa, she's sitting right here, but she's going to hide over there. She likes to hide. She's behind the person camera. So, but
And how
we're
long have you been
happy.
married?
What, 10 years?
Oh,
10 years now.
you have to
Hard to
ask.
remember.
Okay. I love it. Okay, so you've been married. You have any children?
I do. I have a son and 2 daughters, and we have a lot of grandchildren. So all sorts of things.
Awesome.
My wife is telling me over here, we have 5. This is her big thing. 5 under the age of 5.
Oh, 5 under the age of 5. Oh, so you got little ones running around.
They don't run, they crawl everywhere, but
Okay.
they also run.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's what keeps you young, obviously.
Keeps in good shape. I don't know about young.
Do you now? I did say that we were going to wrap this up, and we are. But I did want to ask you, how? I know you said that you've had some health issues with diabetes. Do you do much in the way of like appearances? Because I thought I saw somewhere on, I want to say it was on Twitter, that you were going to a Comic-Con or something you were going to. Do you do much in the way of events anymore? And
I do. I do. I don't do a lot of them. I do Comic-Cons. I do autograph shows because I get letters from the fans saying, I'd like to have your autograph, or I want to do this, and I'd love to meet you. And so I just figured, it's fun. My wife and I go to a city. They treat you real nice. You stay in a hotel for a weekend. It's like a weekend job. You sign a few autographs and meet a lot of nice people. So it's something that's fun for me to do.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you'll make it to North Carolina sometime in the near future so that we can all see you
Good
here.
to me.
All
Sounds
right, very
good.
good. All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Boomer Beat. I want to thank you so much for tuning in and sharing a conversation with Jerry Mathers, also known as the Beaver. And remember his website. Until next time, stay empowered on your journey.
Bye.
Bye.
Good news you can use for your life. If you want to get the info that'll help